Chester Allan Poage was known as a friendly, easygoing young man. He had friends he trusted, family who loved him, and a future that seemed full of promise. Life in Spearfish, with its quiet streets and small-town charm, gave him a sense of safety and community, a feeling that would soon be shattered. He wasn't seeking trouble. He was simply spending time with the people he believed were his friends. That trust, unfortunately, would become the catalyst for a tragedy no one could have imagined. This is A Brutal Betrayal, the senseless murder of Chester Allan Poage. True crime in Spearfish. Hi guys, I'm back again with my fourth true crime video. This one happened in Spearfish, and it's one of the worst local crime stories that I have ever heard. Now, before I take you to Spearfish and Higgins Gulch, where these atrocities against Chester Allan Poage occurred, I'm going to give you some background on his three killers. So the first one, the one that had the hardest life up until this happened, was named Elijah Page. And he was born December 1st, 1981 in Florida. And he endured a really abusive childhood, marked by neglect and molestation and violence. And his family lived in abandoned buildings without heat or utilities. At age 2, his mother exchanged him for drugs, and his stepfather physically and sexually abused him. In the early 90s, Page and his sisters were removed from their home after neighbors reported this abuse. He spent his youth in foster care and juvenile detention, showing early signs of antisocial behavior. Page often ran away from facilities and rejected treatment programs. In 1997, professionals had identified him as exhibiting sociopathic traits, including a lack of remorse and uncontrollable anger. After brief stays in Texas and Missouri, Page moved to South Dakota in 1999, where he began dating Misty Gutler. He lost his job at McDonald's shortly before participating in the March 2000 kidnapping, torture, and murder of 19-year-old Chester. Page pleaded guilty and waived a jury trial. At sentencing, he apologized to Poage's family, expressed his remorse, but admitted he could not explain his actions. Judge Warren Johnson acknowledged Page's horrific upbringing, but found the crime's brutality outweighed any mitigating factors, sentencing him to death in 2001. The South Dakota Supreme Court upheld the sentence in 2006. So, despite claims of remorse, Page was described by inmates as emotionless when recounting the crime. He later wrote to Governor Mike Rounds, requesting to end all appeals and proceed with execution. After a delay due to a technical issue with execution drugs, his death warrant was reinstated for July 2007. Page's mother denied abusing him, though others disputed her account. He refused contact with her, but reconciled with his biological father shortly before his execution. His sister Desiree said he was deeply haunted by his actions, and that his mental state, lack of sleep, and heavy drug use contributed to the murder. Elijah was executed by lethal injection on July 11th, 2007, at age 25. The first execution in South Dakota since 1947, and the youngest person executed in the state's modern era. His last meal was steak, jalapeno peppers, onion rings, salad, and ice cream. He declined to make a final statement. Poage's mother, Dottie, later said she rejected Page's decision to accept his punishment, acknowledging both his remorse and the system's failure to help him before it was too late. Okay, the second one was named Briley Wayne Piper, who was born on March 20th, 1980, in Anchorage, Alaska. And his troubled behavior began early. He was arrested at 13 for assault and robbery, Prosecutors later described him as manipulative and the ringleader in the murder of Chester Allan Poage. Piper pleaded guilty in January 2001 and waived his right to a jury trial. Judge Warren Johnson sentenced him to death, citing Piper's calculated violence and lack of remorse. Evidence presented at sentencing included a foiled jail escape plan involving hostage taking and threats to kill Elijah Page, his co-defendant. Though Piper tearfully apologized in court, witnesses testified that he later laughed about the murder and said he wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. Elijah later claimed he and Daryl Hoadley, not Piper, initiated the murder, saying he had threatened Piper into participating. However, investigators and prosecutors maintained that Piper led the crime, while Page and Hoadley followed. Judge Johnson also noted that unlike Page, Piper came from a stable home and had no excuse for his path into crime. In 2009, the South Dakota Supreme Court overturned Piper's death sentence, ruling that a jury, not a judge, should determine his fate. A jury resentenced him to death in 2011, a decision upheld in 2019. Following the 2019 execution of Charles Russell Rhines, who we learned about in my previous video, he killed Donovan Schaefer, Piper became the only person remaining on South Dakota's death row. As of March 2025, Piper's most recent appeal was denied by a district judge, though he may still appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals. He remains incarcerated at the South Dakota State Penitentiary, awaiting execution. Okay, and number 3 was named Daryl R. Hoadley, and he was born November 5th, 1979, in Laramie, Wyoming. He endured a difficult, abusive childhood and later settled in Leeds, South Dakota, where he had a daughter. Unlike his accomplices Elijah Page and Briley Piper, Hoadley pleaded not guilty and chose to be tried by a jury. In 2001, the jury deadlocked 8-4 in favor of a life sentence, sparing him from execution. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without parole and remains incarcerated at the South Dakota State Penitentiary. Okay, so Tater and I will be traveling to Spearfish, and we'll be going to the approximate location of where Chester died. So, see you there. Heyo, friends. Here's Higgins Gulch, just north of Spearfish here. And it was somewhere along this road here that Chester Allan Poage was murdered by 3 people who he thought were his friends. So we're gonna get into that. Firstly, I should tell you a little bit about Chester. He was born July 4th, 1980 in Norton County, Kansas. He had a younger sister named Samantha. And in 1994, the family moved to Rapid City. And then Chester's parents divorced, his mom filed for divorce. And a couple days later, in 1996, this was 1996, Chester's dad committed self-unaliving. Gotta clean it up for YouTube. So they briefly moved back to Kansas, but then when Chester was in technical school, college, the family moved to Spearfish. And at the time of his death, Chester was about to graduate Northwest Kansas Technical School. So, growing up, Chester didn't have a lot of friends. He struggled to make friends. He was kind of tall and gangly. He was teased because of his height and his name. The kids would tease him about his name, Chester. So he went by his middle name, Allan, for a little bit. Or as an adult, I guess. When he was older. So he was really thrilled when he made friends with Riley Piper and Elijah Page and Daryl Hoadley, and the four would meet regularly to play video games. And on the night of March 13th, 2000, the four were over at Chester's family's house playing video games. Now, Chester's mom, Dottie, and his sister, Samantha, they had decided to take a vacation to Florida at that time. So Chester was alone in the house. He volunteered to stay home and house sit, I guess. So they're all playing video games, right? Two of the guys kind of veered off and went upstairs and went into various rooms trying to rob the place. And they did pick up a gun. And so later, the group drove in Poage's Chevrolet Blazer to the home where their three men were staying. And once inside, Elijah Page pulled a stolen .22 caliber pistol and ordered Chester to the floor. The man wanted to rob his home and eliminate him as a witness. So, Chester was beat unconscious. He was tied up, forced to drink a mixture of beer and crushed pills and hydrochloric acid. And after stealing his ATM card, the three guys discussed killing him while he was still conscious. They then forced Poage into his vehicle and drove about 7 miles here to this remote area known as Higgins Gulch. Now, I'm not sure exactly where he was taken, but it was somewhere along this road here. When they pulled up here, there was about a foot of snow on the ground. It was March, and it was Spearfish, you know, up here in the Black Hills. So they stripped him nearly naked, down to his undershirt, and his socks, I believe, were the only things he was allowed to keep on. And he was beaten and stabbed as he lay in the freezing creek. And there's a creek down here. He pleaded to be allowed into his vehicle to die in warmth, but instead he was dragged back into the icy water. where his attackers attempted to drown him. The assault lasted for hours. And it only ended when Poage and Hoadley dropped heavy rocks on his head, killing him. They had actually kicked him and beaten him so bad his ears were ripped off. And stabbed through one of his ears into his eardrum. So after hours of torture, poor Chester finally died. Early morning hours, March 14th. So after the murder, Poage, Piper, and Hoadley fled the scene in Chester's Chevrolet Blazer and returned to his home to steal clothing, a stereo system, and other valuables. They then drove to Hannibal, Missouri to stay with Piper's sister, who turned them away. The trio returned to South Dakota using Chester's ATM card to withdraw cash and sell his belongings before eventually splitting up. Piper headed back to Alaska. So on April 22nd, a woman found Chester's remains in the creek on her property. The autopsy confirmed he'd been stabbed multiple times, blunt force trauma to the head. 3 days later, police interviewed Hoadley, who confessed and identified his accomplices. Warrants were issued, and within days, Poage was arrested in Texas and Piper in Alaska. Both men confessed to their roles in the crime and were extradited to South Dakota, where they pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. And we already discussed what happened after that to these monsters. Now, Chester is buried in his hometown of Norton, Kansas. So, of course, I can't travel there and see his grave, which is sad. But that was the brutal slaying of Chester Allan Poage. The murder of Chester Allan Poage remains one of the most heartbreaking crimes in South Dakota's history. A story not just of violence, but of deep betrayal. Chester was a young man who trusted the wrong people, believing they were his friends. Instead, that trust was met with unimaginable cruelty. The men responsible were eventually brought to justice, but the loss left an unfillable void in the hearts of those who loved him. Today, Chester's story serves as a reminder of how fragile trust can be and how important it is to value compassion and empathy in a world that can sometimes feel cold and unkind. Though his life was taken too soon, Chester Allan Poage will always be remembered, not for the way he died, but for the life he lived and the love he left behind.